I was 40 feet up the long run with both hands in the ice water when the chute took my brother out from under me. Ori had gone down onto the key log the way he had gone down onto 1,000 of them, easy, half laughing, his boots reading the timber better than my eyes ever could. "It's breathing," he called up to me. "Hear it." I heard it. That was the last honest hour of my life, and I wanted on the record that I heard it. The long run had a note, the way a held rope has a note, and every man in Drenaway learned that note before he learned his letters. Low and steady meant the timber was running. Sharp and rising meant it was stacking. Gone quiet meant get off. It went quiet. I shouted he was already turning. He got 2 strides, 2, and then the whole spine of the run let go beneath him with a sound like a country clearing its throat, and 40,000 pounds of wet spruce stood up on its end and folded my brother under it, and the water took the rest. I went in after him. Of course I went in after him. I am the Alpha King of Drenaway, and I have never in my life been the strongest thing in that gorge, and I went in anyway, and the flood put its hand flat on my chest and moved me a 1/4 mile downstream like I was a leaf it had no opinion about. When I came up, half the chute was gone, the gorge was full of running timber, and my brother was under it somewhere, and my hands could not hold anything. That was the first minute. I want you to understand what the rest of that day cost, so I will tell you the rest of it plainly, though it has taken me years to be able to. Drenaway is a wet country. We are a gorge and a green river and 11 miles of timber run, and that is all we are. The high woods stand up on either side of us like walls, and the sea gate sits at the bottom of the gorge where the water finally gives up and lies down, and between the two runs the chute, a wooden trough, a rib cage of trestles, a made river laid alongside the born one down which we coast our timber to the ships. Coasting, we call it. Not driving, not hauling. Coasting. You do not push the timber down. You put it in at the top with your hands, and you let the country do the rest. And your whole art, your whole trade, your whole worth as a man in this kingdom, is knowing what the country is going to do before it does it. You know by listening, that is all. There is no other way, the run tells you. My brother Ori was the best chute master born in 3 generations, and I say that as a king who was supposed to be better than him at everything. He was not my rival. He was the man I trusted with the only thing I could not do alone. He had a wife once and lost her, and he had a boy left over, and he had a way of standing at the head of the run with his head tilted like a dog at a door, listening to 11 miles of water and telling me the truth about it. He was 34. He was on the key log because I had asked him to be. That is not something I get to put down. The boy was on the landing. I did not know that until later. Pell was 6 years old and he had no business within a mile of a working run, and Ori had brought him up that morning anyway, because the boy had asked, and because Ori could not tell that boy no about anything, and because it was a fine, bright thaw morning and the run had a good note in it, and nothing was going to happen. When the chute went, the landing went with it. It simply tipped, the way a table tips, and everything on it. Timber, tools, 2 run men, and a 6-year-old in his father's cut-down coat went into brown water going faster than a horse. I was a 1/4 mile down and under. I did not see it. I have had it described to me by 9 different men, and I have built it in my head so many times that I can see it now better than they did, and none of that is worth anything because I was not there. Here is what the 9 men agree on. The boy went in and came up once near the far bank, in the seam of water where the flood peels off the rock and runs backwards. Every man on the near bank was already in the river or already dead. On the far bank there was nobody, because there is nothing on the far bank, no road, no landing, only the drowned scrub and the Ainsit camp a half-mile back through it, which in those days was not on any map I had ever signed. And out of the drowned scrub came a woman. Nobody agrees on her face. 2 of them say she was tall, 1 says she was not. They all agree on 3 things, and I have kept those 3 things the way another man keeps a wedding ring. She did not run to the water. She ran 12 strides upstream first, which none of my men understood at the time, and every one of them understands now, because that is where the seam would carry him, and you do not swim to where a drowning thing is, you swim to where the water is taking it. She went in with her coat on, a driver's habit. You keep the coat because the coat is what you use to bind and to carry and to hold with your teeth when your hands are full. And she came out with him, up the mud on the far bank, on her knees, with my brother's son face down over her arm and her fist in his belly, and she got the water out of him and she got him breathing. And by the time the first of my men had fought across the flood to reach that bank, she had wrapped the boy in her own coat and set him on a dry rock above the line and gone. Gone into the scrub, not a name, not a word. My man Haver Skeet, master of the boom, a man who has never in his life exaggerated anything, said she looked back once and then she was simply not there anymore. I found out my brother was dead and my heir was alive in the same sentence, from the same man, standing in water up to my waist. I want to tell you I felt them separately. I did not. They came in together, and they have never fully come apart since. We buried Ori 4 days later, when the river gave him back, which it did not have to do and which I have always chosen to take as a courtesy. Pell did not speak at the burying. He had not spoken since the bank. He stood beside me in his father's cut-down coat, not the one she wrapped him in. That one I had folded in my own chamber, and we will come to it, and he held 2 fingers of my hand, and he watched, and he did not make a sound, and he has not made a sound since, and I remember thinking with the strange, flat clarity of a man whose life has just ended, all right, I will simply carry both of them. That night I stood at the head of the ruined run and listened. There was nothing. Understand me. There was noise. There was more noise than there had ever been in the history of that gorge. A broken chute pouring, a flood at full thaw, timber grinding on rock for 11 miles. My ears worked. My wolf's ears worked, and my wolf's ears are better than a horse's. I could hear a man's heart from across a hall. But the note was gone. I stood there half the night waiting for the country to say something to me, and it said nothing. It just made a sound, the way a crowd makes a sound, the way a broken machine makes a sound. And by dawn I understood that the thing my brother had spent his whole life teaching me, the one art that makes a man worth anything in Drenaway, had gone into the water with him and had not come back up. A king of this country who cannot read the run is a man wearing a crown in a room where everyone else is working. I told nobody. For a long time I told nobody, and I would like to say that was courage, and it was not. It was the other thing. We had until the next thaw. That is the arithmetic of Drenaway, and I will give it to you plainly, because everything that follows is built on it. The chute was broken. A broken chute is not a disaster. It is a winter's work. Men can rebuild a trestle. What we could not do was rebuild it and clear the gorge, because the flood had left 11 miles of loose timber lying in the river, thousands of logs, our own good spruce, scattered down the whole length of the country and drying out on the rocks. Loose timber in a gorge does one thing. It waits for the next thaw, and then it goes down together, all at once, uncontrolled, and it finds the narrowest place in the river, and it stops there, and it stacks, and it builds a wall. The narrowest place in our river is the throat, a bend where the gorge closes to 11 feet of rock. Below the throat is the sorting boom, the sea gate, the yards, 3 villages, and on the flats where the water spreads, a camp. If the throat jams and then breaks, everything below it goes. So we had a winter. One winter to pull every loose log out of 11 miles of river by hand, and rebuild the run, and be standing clean and ready at the head of it when the thaw came, or the country would kill itself with its own wealth. I put every hand in Drenaway on the boom, every hand. And when every hand was not enough, and it was not remotely enough, I did the thing my council had been telling me for 2 years not to do. I hired the camp. They had come over the mountains in the autumn before, and there were about 1,100 of them, and they were the last of a country called Ainsit. Ainsit was upriver of us over the divide, and it had been a lake country, a high green shelf held back by a wall their grandfathers built. In the spring before, the wall failed. It did not fail quickly. That is the part of it nobody outside Ainsit ever seems to hear. It failed over 2 days, and for 2 days the whole country stood on that wall and tried to hold it with timber, and their drivers, Ainsit-bred drivers the way we breed them. It was the same water, the same trade, the same ear went out onto the jam again and again to pull the logs that were levering the wall apart. And they held it for 2 days, and then it went, and it took the country and most of them with it. What came over the divide into Drenaway that autumn was 1,100 people with no land, no ledger, no house, and nothing left of a nation but the way they stood in the rain. My council hated them. I want to be fair to my council because they were not wicked men, and one of them was right. Haver Skeet, master of the boom, 40 years on the water, was against putting an Ainsit hand on my boom list, and his reason was this: the timber in our river is not all ours. When Ainsit drowned, its whole standing stock went into the water, and every spring since, black waterlogged ancient spruce had been coming over the divide and into our gorge, dead timber, heavy, sunk half under, worth nothing at the sea gate and worse than nothing in a run. It is the drowned wood that jams. Ours coasts. There sinks and catches and holds. They brought their dead country with them, drust, Haver told me in council in the winter, with the rain on the shutters. I'll not have them on the list. Every man on my boom is a man I'll have to look at afterward. He was not being cruel. He was being a man who had pulled my brother out of the river with his own hands, and did not intend to do it twice. And he was right about the timber. That is the thing. He was right, and I overruled him, and I have never once been sorry, and I want both of those on the record together. I put the camp on the boom. Not on the list. My council would not carry that, and I did not have the strength that winter to make them, and that failure is mine, and I will hold it. Off the list. Day hands, half wages. Half wages for the people who saved us. I signed it my own hand, winter of that year. Now the coat. I had it from the first night. Haver brought it to me wrapped in oilcloth, because Haver is the sort of man who understands what a thing is before anyone tells him. It was a driver's coat, and it had been a good one once, and it had been mended so many times that there was more mend than coat. Heavy waxed wool, elbows refaced with leather, and down the inside of the left forearm, where a driver rests the shaft of a peavy when she carries it slung, someone had stitched a doubled seam in a pattern I had never seen in my life, a running stitch that turned back on itself every third pass, so the thread lay in little closed loops like a chain. Ain't it stitching? I did not know that yet. I only knew it was not ours. I put that coat in my own chamber, and I did not put it away for the whole of the winter, and Pell, who did not speak, who had not spoken since the bank, who ate and slept and let me carry him and looked at me with his father's exact eyes. Pell would come in at night and put his hand flat on that coat where it hung, and stand there, and then go to bed. Every night, all winter, his hand flat on the coat. You do not need me to tell you what that did to a man. I looked for her. God, I looked for her. I sent word into the camp. The king wishes to thank the woman who came out of the scrub on the day of the run. Nothing. I raised it, a place at the sea gate, a house, land, my open hand, name your price. Nothing. I went myself twice, and stood in the mud between their shelters in the rain with my hood down so they could see whose face it was. And 1,100 people looked back at me with perfect courtesy and perfect blankness, and told me, one after another, that they did not know. I could not understand it. I was a young king who had been raised to believe that the world runs on exchange, and here was a woman who had done the largest thing anyone had ever done for me and would not take a coin for it, and I could not make it fit inside my head, and it made me, I will be honest, it made me angry. Some nights it made me very angry. I would stand in front of that coat with my brother 4 months in the ground, and my brother's son mute in the next room, and I would think, come and be thanked. It costs you nothing. Come and be thanked and let me put one single thing right. It did not once occur to me, that entire winter, that I might be the danger. I worked the boom myself. I want that understood too, because of what my council said about it, and because of what it turned out to matter for. A king of Drenaway is not a decoration. My father worked the boom and his mother worked the boom. But I worked it that winter the way a man drinks, every day, all day in the water, until my hands cracked and would not close in the morning, because the boom was the only place in my kingdom where the noise was loud enough to drown out the fact that I could no longer hear anything in it. The sorting boom is a raft of chained logs across the slack water above the sea gate, and the work is this. The loose timber comes down, and you stand on the chain in the cold, and you read each log as it comes, and you send it left or right, good spruce to the gate, drowned wood to the burn pile, and you do it with a 14-foot peavy and your own balance. And if you are shifted, we do it with our teeth and our shoulders in the water, which is faster and colder, and is how the young men show off. And in the second week of that winter, standing on the chain with my hands bleeding into my gloves, I heard a woman say, quietly, off to my left, "That one sound, it's just wet." And the note came back. I need you to understand this properly, because everything I did afterward looks like madness otherwise, and it was not madness, it was the most sensible thing I have ever done. The river had been noise for 4 months. 4 months of grinding, undifferentiated, meaningless roar. And a woman I could not see said 7 words about a log in a flat voice without any music in it at all, and the whole 11 miles above me resolved, the way a crowd resolves into a chorus, the way a smear of paint resolves into a face when you step back, and I heard the run. Low, steady, stacking a little at the third bend, breathing. I heard my country again. I turned around so fast I nearly went in. There were 40 people on that boom. Half of them were shifted and in the water. The ones on the chain were bundled to the eyes. And I stood there like a fool, a king with a peavey, looking for a voice. Who spoke? I said. Nobody answered, which on my own boom in my own country had never happened to me before in my life. And then a woman about 20 feet down the chain turned a log over with a short, economical flick that a man could work 40 years and not learn, and looked at me and looked away and went back to work. That was the first time I saw Rona Fell. She was not tall. She had a face that had decided some time ago not to spend anything it did not have to. Wet dark hair pushed back and cut short the way drivers cut it, so it cannot be caught. A coat that was not hers. I noticed that. I noticed it and thought nothing of it, and I have never forgiven myself for the 4 months that followed a Drenaway coat, borrowed, too big in the shoulder. And her hands, I want to say something about her hands because it is the only thing about her I got right on the first day. Her hands were a shoot-master's hands, not a laborer's. There is a difference and it is not size. A laborer's hands are strong. A driver's hands are quiet. They do not grab, they rest on the wood and wait for it to tell them something. My brother had hands like that. I had watched him do it my whole life. She had my brother's hands, and she was working my boom for half a wage, and I did not know her name. You, I said. What's your name? She said, Dayhand. And she turned back to the water. Now, I have been Alpha King of Drenaway since I was 22 years old. I have had one man in my life speak to me like that, and he is buried above the third bend. And I stood there on my own chain in the cold, with the note ringing in my head for the first time since my brother died. And instead of doing any of the 11 kingly things available to me, I laughed. It came out of me like a cough. It was an awful sound. 40 people heard it. The boy Pell, sitting up on the bank where he sat every day now because he would not let me out of his sight, looked up. And Rona Fell did not laugh, and did not look up, and did not stop working. And I understood, dimly, the way you understand, Weather, that I had just met the first person in my kingdom who was not going to make this easy for me. I went home that night and stood in front of the stitched coat for a long time. I did not put it together, not for months. That is the part I have to live with. I had the coat, and I had the hands, and I had the 7 words that gave me my river back, and I did not put it together because I was a king looking for a hero, and what I had found was a Dayhand. Haver came to me at the end of that week with the ledger and said, You're on the boom 12 hours a day. The council's talking. Let them. Drust, he put the ledger down. You've been standing next to the same woman all week. I said she reads water. She's ainsid. She reads water better than any man you've got. Haver was quiet for a moment. Then he said the thing that should have ended it, and I want it here in his own honest voice, because he was right about this too, and I did not hear him. He said, that's what worries me. Where'd she learn? I set out to learn her name the way I would have set out to take a country, and I lost every day for 4 months. I worked beside her. That was the first thing, and I was not subtle about it. And by the end of the second week, every hand on that boom knew that if you wanted to stand next to the king, you had best not stand next to the Ainsit Dayhand, because that spot was taken. Cold, I would say. Lie. You've been at this a while. Lie. Where? And a log would come down the slack, and she would set the point of her peavey into it and turn it over and read it and send it left. And the conversation would be finished, not rudely, not even coldly, the way a door closes because that is what doors do. I tried gifts. I am not proud of the gifts. I sent a coat, a proper one, new, and it came back folded. I sent boots and they came back. I put a full wage in her hand at the end of a week and she looked at it and said, The list says half, and put it down on the chain and walked away, and the coins went into the river, and 40 people watched a king pick coins out of a boom with a peavey. I sent a house. There is a stone house at the sea gate with a slate roof that has stood empty since my aunt died, and I sent word that it was hers. And word came back through Haver, 4 days later, delivered with the particular flatness of a man enjoying himself. She says she doesn't want a house. Everyone wants a house. She says, Haver said, and I'm giving it you as she gave it me, that a house is a thing you can be found in. I did not understand that. I turned it over for a month and did not understand it. I thought it was pride. I thought it was some hard Ainsit flint. some refusal to be indebted to a Drenaway king, and I respected it, and it enraged me, and I wanted it explained, and there was nobody to explain it. And all the time the answer was standing 20 feet down my own chain, turning logs over with her quiet hands. And every day the note. I want to be exact about this, because it is the strangest thing that has ever happened to me, and I will not have it made pretty. It was not magic. Nobody rang, no mark burned, there was no light. There was a woman working, and when she spoke, about anything, about the wet, about a log, about nothing, that one's a sounder. Your chains slack at the fourth link, 6 words, 8. The noise of my country came apart into meaning in my head and stayed apart for as long as she kept talking and for a little while after. And when she was silent, or absent, or gone home to the camp through the scrub in the dark, the river went back to being a crowd. Do you know what that made me? It made me a man who invented reasons to make a quiet woman talk, 12 hours a day, all winter. A king asking a day-hand, pointless questions about link chains because the sound of her voice gave him back the only skill that made him fit to wear his father's ring. I was ashamed of it. I want that on the record beside everything else. I was ashamed, and I did it anyway, every single day, because the alternative was to stand in my own gorge deaf. She knew, I am certain of it now. She knew by the 3rd week, and she never once said so, and she never once refused me the words. She would give me my 8 words and go back to work. She was, I think, the only person alive who could have humiliated me and simply chose not to, and did not make a gift of the choosing either. I only asked her about it once. Late, dark, the boom lit with pitch lamps, both of us with our hands in the water to the elbow. Do you hear the run? I said. Everyone hears the run. No, I said, the note. Her hands stopped, only for a breath. But they were driver's hands, and driver's hands do not stop, and so it was as loud to me as a shout. She said, I hear it. What's it saying? And she looked at me, properly, for the first time, straight, and her eyes were not cold at all. That was the thing that undid me. They were not cold, they were careful, the way you are careful with something you have already watched break once. It's saying it's got too much in it, she said. And she went back to work, and I stood there with my heart going like a boy's, and I did not ask the second question. I did not ask how much. I had my note back, and I was so glad of it that I did not ask the only question that mattered. And 1,100 people nearly paid for that. And the fact that they did not is entirely her doing and none of mine. Now I have to tell you about the day young Tam Ori went under the boom, because it is when I stopped being a man who was curious about her, and became a man who was afraid of what she was. A sorting boom is a chain of logs, and the water under it is not slack. It only looks slack. Underneath, it is going. If you go in between the logs, you come up. If you go in and the boom closes over you, you do not come up, because there is a lid on the river now, and you cannot find the seam, and every man on the water knows it, and nobody says it out loud. Tam was 19. He was showing off, shifted, swimming a big spruce down the chain with his shoulder against it the way the young ones do, and a drowned log came down the slack, black, half-sunk, one of the sounders, and it caught him amidships and put him and his spruce sideways into the chain, and the chain closed. 40 men went for him, all of them wrong. They went to where he'd gone in. Rona was already 20 feet upstream, walking. Not running. Walking fast along the chain, counting, I saw her lips. And at the 11th log she went flat on her belly on the wet timber, drove her arm down into the black water to the shoulder, and hauled a 19-year-old wolf up through a gap the width of my thigh, by the scruff, like a woman lifting a bucket. He came up shifting and screaming and alive. The boom went silent. Even the water seemed to lose interest. She was already sitting back on her heels, wringing out her sleeve. How, I said. I heard my own voice, and it was not a king's voice. It was flat and frightened, and she heard it too. He was under the spruce, she said. The spruce runs, the sounder doesn't. The spruce was going to walk him 11 logs down and hold him against the black one. She shrugged. She actually shrugged. So I went to the black one. And I remembered, the way you remember something you have been carrying so long you forgot it at a weight. She ran 12 strides upstream first. 9 men had told me that. 9 men had told me that a woman came out of the scrub and ran the wrong way before she went in, and every one of them had said it with wonder, and I had kept it like a jewel. and I had never once thought to ask which of the 1,100 people in that camp could do that arithmetic in her head at a dead run. And I still did not put it together. Do you understand? I still did not. I was looking straight at her. Because I had a hero in my head, and the hero was tall, and the hero was going to come to the door and be thanked. And the woman in front of me was a day hand at half wages who had just told me the least remarkable thing in the world in a bored voice. We do not see people. That is the whole of it. That is the only wisdom I have ever earned. We do not see people. We see the shape we have already cut for them. The boy started sitting nearer. Pell had a rock. It was his rock, upstream of the boom, high enough to see everything and far enough that nobody had to pretend he was not there. And he had sat on it every working day since the burying, silent in his father's coat, with his chin on his knees, watching me not drown. In the 3rd month I looked up, and he was on the chain. My heart went into my mouth, the chain, the boy on the chain. And then I saw where he was, and I stopped. He was sitting on the 4th log with his boots on the wood and his back against a bollard. And Rona Fell was working the gap in front of him with her back to him, and she had given him a mallet. A little one. A tapping mallet, the sort you use to sound a log. She did not turn around. She did not coo at him. She did not say one soft word to that boy, not one, and I had watched 100 kind women in that country try soft words on him for 4 months and watched him go further and further inside himself each time. She said over her shoulder in the same flat voice she used on me, "Tap that one." And Pell tapped it. Again, middle. Tap. That's a sounder, hear it. Dead thing goes thud, sound thing rings. She hooked the log and rolled it away to the burn pile without looking at him. Next. Tap. Aye, that one's alive. Left. And my brother's son, who had not made a sound in 4 months, who slept with his hand on a stranger's coat, who had gone into a river at 6 years old and never come back all the way out, sat on my boom for 2 hours tapping logs with a little mallet, and telling a woman which ones were dead, without words. Only the mallet, thud, ring, and she took every single answer as though it had been spoken by a colleague. I could not work. I stood there like a fool with the water going past my legs. That night at home, he stopped at the stitched coat as he always did, and put his hand flat on it as he always did. And then he tapped it, twice with 2 fingers the way you sound a log. I did not sleep at all. I want to say something about the wolves before I tell you the rest, because Drenaway is a wolf country and you have not seen us work. We shift for the night runs. There is no help for it. The last 2 hours of a winter day the light goes brown and then goes altogether, and a man on a chain in the dark is a man who will be in the water inside the hour, but a wolf on a chain in the dark is at home. We work the boom shifted, 30 of us, running the timber in the pitch lamp's throw, and my own wolves. I keep 6 real animals, not shifted men. The old gray working stock that has been in my family longer than my family has been kings. Work the shallows for the strays. The first night she stayed for it, I watched to see what she would do. Everyone does. It is not a small thing, 40 wolves on a chain in the dark, and I have seen grown men from the low countries go up a tree. She did nothing. She kept working. My gray bitch Kel came up the chain behind her at a trot and put her nose in the back of Rona's knee, which is Kel's opinion of a person and is not always favorable, and Rona reached back without turning round and put 2 fingers under the wolf's jaw, exactly right, exactly where you do it, and went on sorting. Later I came up the chain on 4 legs and sat down at the edge of her lamp throw, because I was a coward, and it was easier to be near her that way. She said, not turning, "Your grandsire kept greys too." I could not answer, obviously. "We had greys," she said, "in Ainsit." The water went by. "They went on the wall with the drivers," she said. "The last day, nobody told them to." She hooked a log and let it go. "That's the part I mind mostly, nobody told them to." And then she said, flat, unhurried, to a wolf in the dark, and I do not think she would ever have said it to the man. They were good at it, and it didn't save anyone, and they went anyway. She worked another hour and went home through the scrub, and I sat on the chain in the shape of an animal and did not move for a long time. I made my great mistake in the 4th month. I did it in front of the council. That is what makes it a great mistake rather than an ordinary one. I did it in the hall with the rain on the shutters and Haver Skeet, and 11 men who had been sitting all winter on a proposal to strike the camp off the boom entirely and close the divide. And I stood up and I said, I am making Rona Fell shoot master of Drenaway. I had it all worked out. I want you to see how clever I was. Shoot master is a post. A post has a name on it. A name on a post goes on the list, and a name on the list is a person, and a person cannot be sent away by 11 frightened men in a hall. And I told myself this was somewhere far down the reasons, and it was not. It was the top one. A shoot master stands at the head of the run every day of the working year, beside the king, talking. I would have my river, and she would be safe. And I would have done, at last, the one thing I had been trying to do for 4 months, which was to put a thing in that woman's hands that she could not hand back. The hall was very quiet. Haver said carefully, the post is ain't it held publicly. Yes. Drust. Yes. And he sat back and looked at me with something I had never seen on his face before and did not recognize until later, when I had time, and by then I knew it for what it was. He was looking at me the way you look at a man who has just walked out onto a jam without sounding it. Word was in the camp by dark. Of course it was. I made sure of it. I sent it with a herald in the rain in front of everybody because I wanted the 1,100 of them to see their king put one of their own at the head of his country. She came to the boom the next morning at the ordinary hour, and she looked at me, and I have never in my life been looked at like that before or since, and I am not able to describe it properly. It was not anger. I could have borne anger. She said in front of 40 people, no. Rona. No, and then, quieter, and this is the sentence I have carried ever since. You had one thing you could do for me, and you did the other one. And she picked up her peavy and went back to work, for half a wage, off the list. And I stood there in the middle of my own boom in front of my own people with my ears roaring. They looked at her all day. That is what I had done. For 4 months she had been a coat too big in the shoulder and a pair of quiet hands and nobody's business. And I had stood up in a hall and put a torch on her. And now every man on that chain and every clerk in that yard and every one of my 11 frightened counselors knew the name and face of the ancient woman the king wanted at the head of his run. I had not the faintest idea what I had done. I thought I had been refused. I went home and stood in front of that stitched coat and thought, like a boy, what does she want? The thaw was 6 weeks off when I found it. It was nothing. It was the smallest thing in this whole account. She had torn her sleeve on a boom dog, a bad tear, elbow to cuff. And she sat down on the bollard at the end of the day and took out a needle and mended it there in the last of the light, because you do not go home from a wet job in a torn coat. And I looked at her hands, because I had been looking at her hands for 4 months. And the thread turned back on itself every third pass and lay in little closed loops like a chain. I have been in one battle, and I have been under a flood, and I have carried my brother's body up a bank, and none of those things emptied me the way that did. I stood there on my own boom with the pitch lamps going, and I could not feel my legs. 4 months. 4 months she had been standing there. 4 months I had been asking her pointless questions about link chains to steal her voice for my river. 4 months I had stood in front of a coat every night with my brother's mute son beside me and gone out the next morning and stood next to the woman who had stitched it. I went home. I do not remember going home. I took the coat off the hook and I went back down through the yards in the dark in the rain without a lamp, and the camp was a half-mile through the drowned scrub on the far bank, and I forded the river to get there, which no sensible man does at night in the spring, and I did not care. She was outside her shelter. She had a small fire, and she was doing what she did every night, which I had never once wondered about. She was mending other people's coats. She looked up and saw what I had over my arm, and she did not stand. Ah, she said. That was all, like a woman who has dropped something and heard it break. I could not speak. I stood there in the rain with her coat in my hands and my throat closed. Sit down, she said. You're too big to look at from here. I sat down. The Alpha King of Drenaway sat down in the mud of a refugee camp because a landless woman told him to. It was you, I said. Lie. On the bank it was you. Lie. You, my voice went. I had to start again. 4 months. Lie. I begged, I said. I sent word. I stood in that mud with my hood down, and I stopped because I heard it at last, the sound of my own voice, the sound I had been making all winter, and it was not gratitude. It had never been gratitude. It was a man demanding to be allowed to pay so that he could stop feeling it. She let me hear it. She did not help me. She waited until I had heard the whole of it, and then she said, very gently, and gentleness from her was so much worse than the flatness. "Drust, why do you think I was on the far bank?" "The rain came down." "There's nothing on the far bank," I said slowly. "There's no road, there's no landing, there's nothing over there but scrub and the water, the eddy, the seam where the flood peels off the rock and runs backwards and holds everything it catches. The place where anything coming over the divide, down our river, out of a drowned country, would fetch up and turn and lie." "Say it," she said. "You were pulling out sounders," I said. "Every morning since the autumn," said Rona Fell. "Before light, me and 9 others. We waited that eddy and we took out every black ain't log the divide sent down and we dragged it into the scrub and we cut it up and we burned it so that no Drenaway man would ever stand on that bank and count how much of my dead country was already in his river." She looked at me across the little fire. "I was there that morning with a peavy and wet legs and 40 feet of ain't spruce hid in the brush behind me. That's why I could go in, and that's why I couldn't stay." I said, "You saved my son." "Lie. And you ran." "Lie. Why?" "Because if you'd asked me one question," she said, "you'd have had it all. Why was I there? Where'd I learn? What's that in the scrub, then? And by nightfall, your master of the boom would have known there's more of ain't in this gorge than a spring's worth. And by the week's end, there'd have been 1,100 of us walking back over the divide into nothing in the winter with children." She put another stick on the fire, quite calmly. "So I had a choice between being thanked and them eating. I don't think much of it. I'd have made it in my sleep." I sat in the mud with her coat in my hands and understood, finally, what I had been all winter. Not a benefactor, not a grieving king, a danger. A very large, very sincere, very loud danger who had walked into her camp twice with his hood down and stood in the rain saying, "Come out. Come out. Let me put one single thing right." To 1,100 people whose entire survival depended on the king of Drenaway never learning what he was standing on. "The house," I said, "a house is a thing you can be found in." "Lie. And when I stood up in that hall—" "You put my name on your list and a torch on my face," she said. "And Haverskeet has been down the eddy twice this fortnight. He's not a fool, he's counting." "He is not a wicked man," I said stupidly because it was true and because it was all I had. "No," she said, "that's the trouble, isn't it? He's a good man with 40 years on the water, and he's right about the timber, and he'll be right when he says it. And 1,100 people will still be walking over that divide." The fire hissed. Somewhere out in the black, the river went on making its noise, and I realized I had been hearing the note the whole time, unbroken, for the longest stretch since my brother died, because for once in 4 months this woman was actually talking to me. I said, "How much is in the river?" And Rona Fell looked at me for a long moment with her needle still in her hand, and I watched her decide to hand me the thing she had been holding alone since autumn. 6 years, she said, "near enough. There's 6 years of drowned ain't it lying in your gorge above the throat, king, and a winter's loose Drenaway spruce lying on top of it, and it's all coming down together in about 5 weeks." I could not speak. "And it will not coast," she said. "It will stack. And it will stack at the throat on the black wood because black wood doesn't run, black wood stops. And when 11 miles of your country arrives behind it, it will build you a wall 11 feet wide and 60 high, the same as the one my grandfathers built, and it will hold." And for the first time all winter, her voice did something. It went down, and it was the worst sound I have ever heard. "It will hold for about 2 days." The rain came down on the fire. "And below the throat," I said. "I," said Rona. "Below the throat is your sea gate, and your 3 villages, and your boys' rock and my camp."